war politics. So we need to get back into that today and talk about John Tyler. So first of all, John Tyler was not really expected to be president since he was vice president. Look, I like looking at Ollie's face in the corner. It's kind of weird. Not your face so much as it's like your face alone. All right, so there we go. No face. So if you go back to the election of 1840, so please do, in your mind, go back to 1840. You mind, like, by this period, the Panic of 1837 has sort of destroyed the presidency of Martin Van Buren, right? Guys, there was absolutely no, like, concept of the federal government should do something about this. Like, that's not how it worked at all. Like, the debate about stimulus right now in America's Congress, should it be, $3 trillion or $600 billion? They would not have talked about that. That wasn't even remotely considered. Keep in mind, this is a time period where they don't even build a road, hardly, right? But politics were becoming more participatory because of the age of Jackson. Does that ring a bell? Age of Jackson, common man? And which party had been sort of the anti-Jackson party? That was their umbrella. The Whigs. Like, the Whigs came in as the anti-Jackson party. There was sort of a coalition of national Republicans, old school Federalists, dudes like that. William Henry Harrison was not particularly interesting as a president because he was only president for a month. Keep in mind that the campaign strategy was Tippecanoe and Tyler too. And log cabins and hard cider. I always forget sometimes that log cider, hard cabins. But you understand it was like slogans and jingles, who could get their voters to vote. And so Harrison, the general, gets elected because he's popular, not because he's emphatically a Whig or not. Okay? So far, so good. And they theorized, they being the Whig gurus, that this was the best strategy. You may recall in 36, they used this favorite son strategy, and that hadn't worked, And they also decided, let's put a Southern states' rightist, small government, almost Jeffersonian style Virginian, on the ticket with Harrison, and maybe that'll attract some states' writers who don't like Jackson. Particularly Jackson's response to the nullification crisis, which kind of seemed not very states' right. You understand? So far, so good. The problem is that John Tyler was not in any way like a Whig, other than he didn't like Andrew Jackson. And he probably should never have accepted being on the ticket because he didn't reflect what the leading Whigs of his day believed. So if you think about who the leading Whigs of his day were, guys like Henry Clay, guys like Daniel Webster, not Noah Webster, by the way. Somebody put Daniel Webster down in the dictionary. Don't do that, y'all. Different Websters. Okay? So Daniel Webster was a big old school Federalist. He was a literal Federalist before this. So John Tyler was a states' rightist. And both Clay and Webster thought they were going to manipulate Harrison. He had to actually remind, in his 1 month in office, he had to remind them that he was the president, not them. Now, if you've forgotten why Harrison died, this is one of those great ironies of history. Harrison was, at the time, the oldest man ever elected president, and one of the oldest ever elected ever. And so there was questions about his health. And so he gave the longest inaugural address in history in a chilly kind of, March day. Back then, inaugurations weren't in January, they were in March. And he got pneumonia and died, a month later. So, his inauguration didn't kill him, but he got sick and died probably relative to it. Okay? That's kind of ironic.
Who was that?
William Henry Harrison, President Harrison, our 9th president. Tippecanoe. Remember, he was the hero of the War of 1812. fighting against Tecumseh and the Prophet in Indiana. Got it?
Also, wondering, I know that Garfield, Lincoln, and Kennedy were assassinated. Isn't there one more? I can't remember.
William McKinley. We had 4 presidents killed in office. 4 presidents died in office. Well, actually, 8 presidents died in office. 4 of them died of natural causes. Most notably Franklin Roosevelt. But yeah, so this would be the first president to die in office. So that's important. And that's where we start. So when he takes office, there is some debate about, does the vice president become president, or is he like acting president? Is he vice president, but he's in charge? And John Tyler laid that to rest. He's like, I'm president. So since then, the idea of succeeding to the presidency, we do now have an amendment that deals with terms of succession. But at the time, that didn't exist. 20th minute. So anyway, when we get in, or when we 25th amendment, excuse me, that's the one with succession. When you get into Tyler, the problem is that he actually was opposed to what the Whigs wanted to do. He actually opposed it. So areas where he was in opposition. Now, Martin Van Buren, in the last year of his presidency, had decided we're going to divorce the federal money from banks altogether, called the divorce bill, all right, and create an independent treasury to just store the federal government's money. So in other words, there won't be, the federal government's money will not be used as capital. Well, the Whigs hated that because it hurt the folks that best, they represent, particularly. And so they got rid of the independent treasury, which Tyler signed. And then they decided to create a new Bank of the United States, which is what they'd always wanted since Jackson had killed the bus. And then John Tyler blew their mind. John Tyler, theoretically Whig president, vetoed signature Whig issue Bank of the United States. So they were like, what? And he claimed to veto it on constitutional grounds, but that's not, he wasn't accurate. We went over the case McCulloch versus Maryland, right? You certainly better know it. So that's a well question. McCulloch v. Maryland. In that Supreme Court case, John Marshall had said the implied powers under the Elastic Clause were legitimate. The Supreme Court ruled that the bus was constitutional. So really, Tyler just vetoed it because he didn't like it. He's a states' rights guy, small government guy. So they said, all right, we'll rename it. We'll call it a fiscal corporation. Fiscal means like money. And he vetoed that too. Meanwhile, a flu broke out in America and pneumonia. People were getting sick. And they actually blamed it on him. They call it, that's what that grip is with the GRIPPE. That's an illness that spreads across the country. Sound familiar? Nobody that I've heard has called this the Trump virus, right? So at least he hadn't had that stick to him as a legacy. But you may remember things like Hoovervilles and Hoover blankets during the Depression. Van Buren gets blamed for the Panic of 37. They call him Van Ruin. We've been Van Ruined, right? And now Tyler's blamed for a nationwide bout of sickness. Now, in the meantime, the Whigs have been wanting to raise the tariff. You know, that's what Whigs always want to do. Bus and tariff. That's their two big issues. But the problem was there was an element to it that Tyler was going to veto. And it was called dollar distribution. So you need to see that right here, right? Dollar distribution. Under dollar distribution, any excess, and the word excess means like surplus, any surplus generated by this tariff would then be distributed to the states, like divided up and spread out. And that seemed to Tyler a little too sketchy. Like, remember when Madison vetoed bills that were going to states, like sending money like that to states? He didn't like it. So he vetoed that too. So you got a Whig Congress passing bills being vetoed by the party that was elected to the presidency. That seems weird, right? This would be like, you know, Mike Pence vetoing Republican bills as he became president, which would be highly unlikely. But I want to remind you that Tyler was never really a Whig. Not really. That's why I said he shouldn't have served. But hey, so anyway, they do come up with a compromise tariff, which does increase tariff rates back up from 25% to 32%. That's pretty high tariff, man. Okay. But they got rid of dollar distribution. Well, the Whigs considered impeaching him. They're like, we should get rid of this guy. But he hadn't done anything illegal. He hadn't broken any crimes or laws. So they didn't try to impeach him. They thought about it. They talked about it. But in the end, they all quit his cabinet. And they kicked him out of the Whig Party. So Tyler was literally a president without a party. Daniel Webster did not quit his cabinet because he was negotiating a treaty to stop a war between Britain and Maine. We'll talk about that war in a bit. Okay? So Webster doesn't quit, but the rest of his cabinet quits in protest. So that's a huge symbol, like when your whole cabinet quits. He's kicked out of the party. They considered, literally impeaching him, but they didn't. Tyler doesn't have much of a successful presidency. Okay? So let's then move on to why Webster didn't quit, because this is a key period in history, like a really important period to have a successful presidency. So, first of all, we were having real problems with Britain. Now, that sounds shockingly not, unusual. We fought the revolution. It's like every 40 years we got to fight the Brits again, right? So, fought the revolution, fought the War of 1812, and now it looked like tensions were going to heat up again. First of all, the only people in America who have been really considerably consistent pro-Britain were out of power altogether. No more Federalists who were pro-British. Keep in mind, this is the Britain of the Victorian age. This is the Britain that is now taking over India. Britain that's taken over Africa. This is Imperial Britain. I mean, they've been Imperial Britain for a while. More Imperial Britain. The British looked down on us. They looked at us as like the whole nation as a bunch of hillbillies or rednecks. Okay, they mocked us for our countryness. If that makes sense. And we knew that. We knew that they were like Dickens made fun of us. Charles Dickens. Yeah. But Charles Dickens and others were particularly upset about the fact that Americans were stealing British stuff. I also think about we were Britain's China at the time. We were taking their copyrighted materials like inventions and books and making them without copyright or making them on our own, stealing it. So Americans were stealing British copyrighted stuff. And then really, America was, because of the Panic of 37, wasn't paying its bills to, not America, the nation state, but American people weren't paying their bills. Now, folks, that's risky business, because here's what happens if a country stops, if people and its businesses stop paying bills. What usually happens all right, I'm going to give you an example from the future in context. If Cuba or Haiti owed money to Germany, they would threaten to come and take the money from Germany. From Cuba or Haiti. You understand? So Britain was kind of threatening offhand to come collect. I ain't gonna lie. Today we've got a much more modern. Did I tell y'all the story about the the ticket I got in Italy? The Harvey ticket. They tracked me down. I was like, that's an Italy problem. I ain't got to worry about it. They got a California debt collecting service to send me a letter saying I owe the city of Pisa money. I'm like, shoot, I better pay that. I don't want a debt collecting service on my record, my credit rating. You know what I mean? I always pay my bills, but I don't necessarily going to pay a bill to Italy for something I don't like to do. So anyway, we got British people that are like, hey, y'all owe us money. And America was like, we're not going to enforce your debt. So you see the difference? Like a Californian could collect the debt for an Italian now, but they looked at us as like shirkers and hillbillies, and that was heated, but it's more like a war of words. That makes sense, like rhetorical words. They were like, let's go to war. But then you had some stuff that we might call foreign flare-ups. All right. So sorry about the print here. Fix this. So you had a couple different incidents couple different issues that were real problems. Real meaning substantive. The first is a Caroline. And this is where you actually had, I don't have a picture here to show you because it was not as nearly as bad as the American. We propagandized this a little bit, but there were some Canadians who were fighting against Britain. You know, they were trying to get independence. And we were sending arms, I should say we. There were some American people providing assistance across the Niagara River into Canada. So it's like aiding the rebels, so to speak, the rebel alliance. And the British sank this ship, this boat that was carrying goods, set it on fire. Now, I know there's a picture somewhere, I've seen it before, but there's a picture of like the Caroline going over Niagara Falls in flames. That didn't happen, but yeah, that was the propaganda that circulated. Like, the Brits are attacking American merchants and sending them over Niagara. So some Americans, keep in mind what some Americans do we do a big like picture of what all Americans do, right? But this is on the Canadian border. Second, and this really ticked off a lot of Southerners, is we're talking about this Amistad slave rebellion. Well, there was another slave rebellion on a boat called the Creole. And when the Creole's captives, the slaves, like won, they sought asylum on a British ship. You understand, like asylum means like political refugee status, safety. And the British gave it to them. So they basically aided these slaves' freedom. That ticked off some Southerners. But neither of those two incidents are nearly as serious as this last incident. And this last incident is the only war really fought between a country and a state. And it's called the Aroostook War. The Aroostook War. Aroostook is, well, I'll show you, is a river right here in the center of your map. So back when we had declared our independence and the Treaty of Paris had been ratified, Maine's boundaries had never been really well formalized. You understand what I mean by that? Like there had never been an actual solution. And keep in mind, this is wilderness right here. This is Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold eating their horses wilderness. You know, like eating shoe leather, cold, frozen, kind of. And it's almost all heavily wooded. Like heavily wooded. So the only people that really had much use for this area were lumberjacks. So this is called the Lumberjack War. There's a fight between lumberjacks. Canadians wanted a road, see it right here, from Halifax to Quebec. But it ran through this green area. In this green area, Maine claimed to be theirs. All this, but from the Aroostook River up to here. So this is the Aroostook area. And so Britain, meanwhile, claimed the same area. It was like both were claimed. The Aroostook River was what they had said the boundary of Maine should be. So if you go back, that led to actually fighting. New Brunswick or Canada, that part of it was fighting over who could like cut down trees there. So it's called a lumberjack war. Congress was going to went to bat, so to speak, for the state of Maine, saying, wait a minute, Maine is America, we're going to defend this boundary. 50,000 men and $10 million. So they're going to fight a war. Keep in mind, that could have led to a much larger war, right? If we were fighting a war with Canada, Canada was not independent. It was still a dominion of colony of Britain. The overall commanding general of the American Army, Winfield Scott, though, gets the fighting lumberjacks to kind of stop. And they're like, rather than fight, let's negotiate. Always a better outcome, right? Especially since we're fighting over, you know, a bit of territory that we could probably resolve. So Maine kicked out these lumberjacks because they wanted their lumberjacks there. They didn't want to go. We were going to go to war. General Scott gets a truce. And then our Secretary of State who didn't quit, remember his name? Daniel Webster, negotiates with a British, like, member of the House of Lords, Lord Ashburton. So this is known as the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. And they secure this agreement, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. Now, I add something I think your book does too. We got something that we didn't expect out of this. See, the other part of Canada that we had not laid to rest was around Minnesota. Okay? So we wanted to make a formal boundary. We settled a boundary in 1818 here. Got that? But we hadn't quite determined this part of it. You see where it says Lake of the Woods? So we got this, you see this up here above where it's this over here, where it says Lake of the Woods, it says Canada. This is what we thought we had. The kind of black and white dotted. We knew we had that, right? But we weren't sure about this. And so the treaty said from the Lake of the Woods to Lake Superior, right here, would be ours. Well, that meant we got this territory right here, which is the largest iron ore range in the world. Now, we didn't know that at the time. Brits didn't either. They are still pulling iron out of that 140 years later. So it's called the Mesabi, M-E-S-A-B-I, Iron Range. Mesabi, M-E-S-A-B-I. Sounds like a Japanese, like something you put on food. Mesabi Iron Range, or Iron Ore Range. All up here at Grand Rapids and all the way over. So that huge red rift up there is this. This is just an example of an iron mine or quarry. You can see. You see how the ground is rusted? That's because there's that much metal there. Just metal. And so we call this now the North Country. Bob Dylan, the very famous musician, is from Minnesota, and he writes songs about like "Girl from the North Country." So if you think about iron in America, I-R-O-N, this is by far the largest supply of it. And it was completely unexpected. We didn't know that. Isn't that cool? Saudi Iron Ore Range. All right. Now, let's also go kind of flash back and refresh our memory here. Texas. Remember Texas? It got its independence. When? That's all right. It says it right there. It's big letters and numbers. 1836, right? Battle of the Alamo, they lost. Battle of what? They won? San Jacinto. All right. San Jacinto. That's their big victory. Who led it? Houston. Sam Houston. So right down here in the blue is where Houston has gotten the victory. Okay? Way down here is where the Alamo is. Okay. Now, from 36, 38 really, to 45, Texas was what? Lone Star Republic. Independent. Now, before we answer any other questions, why was it not annexed under Andrew Jackson? A guy who was totally comfortable with westward expansion, totally comfortable with slavery. He did not want to have the debate over slavery addition to the United States. In other words, have we had that debate already? It's very compromised, right? He didn't really want to have another debate about it. So Jackson kind of pushed it off, uncharacteristically, but he had his hands full. Van Buren pushed it off because he's trying to do a what? Panic. Harrison's dated. Now, when I say push it off, what has Texas been asking for pretty much routinely each year? Hey, can we come join you? We want to be on the team. We're Americans. It's good, right? Not good. So they're like, all right, I guess they're not going to take us. We should start talking to other people. And so they do. They start talking to who, for example? Britain, about like forming trade relations and treaties. And I mean, they are a country, technically, right? So they're like, okay, we'll just start talking to people. Britain had every reason to want to negotiate with Texas as a country. If they became friendly with Texas and Texas did not become a state, that would limit how far west America could go. Right? If that big old chunk of land stays, you might, at the time, a lot of people in Europe just assumed where was America headed? Not just, yes, true, but where else was it headed? Yeah, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, all of that would be on our target. Because, we're kind of doing that anyway. We're headed like slavery south, particularly Nicaragua. We'll take it all. So they want to check that. They also want to have some influence. If their allies are friends with the Texans, that'll put some influence against the Monroe Doctrine. All right? So far, so good. Abolitionists, I think, are misguided in Britain, but they think maybe, we can push to have a slave-free zone. Keep in mind, Texas will end up being a slave state. It doesn't matter. But nonetheless, they want somewhere where they can help slaves escape southward. But merchants, most probably, or probably most loudest, would love to trade with Texans and not have to pay tariffs. Keep in mind, this tariff that's just been passed is 30-some%, right? 32%. So a non-protected state. They want to check the growth of the United States, check our influence in the Western Hemisphere, not just the United States. Says here, British abolitionists were busily intriguing for a foothold. They were hoping to incite Southern slaves to either rebel or escape. Okay? Guess you could add another option on there I didn't put up here, but guess what grows in Texas? I have a football game named this down there every year. Oh, they're loud. What's that?
I forgot.
They have a Cotton Bowl.
No, the cotton.
Yeah, they have a Cotton Bowl in Texas. You know why? Cotton grows in Texas. So wouldn't it be nice to buy cotton from somebody who doesn't have, American protectionism on it? Right? So lots of reasons why the Brits are interested in Texas. Now, this is where John Tyler makes an interesting thing. Because John Tyler really has had no accomplishments as president. And he's been president the whole time, basically, about a month. So he says, let's look at the election of 1844 and listen to what the candidates say. And if the guy who gets elected is talking about taking Texas, well, that might be a good idea. The guy who gets elected is named James K. Polk. I guess it was one of the things he campaigned on. Taking Texas. So John Tyler says, keep in mind, John Tyler's a lot more like James K. Polk than he is like Henry Clay. So John Tyler says, oh yeah, I could do this. We'll push for Texas statehood. But then he runs into a problem. Normally, how would a country add territory to America? Well, that would require what? What usually have to happen when we get territory from somewhere else? The Webster-Ashburton, the Florida Purchase treaty. Yeah, usually we have to have a treaty. Everybody get that? The problem with the treaty is it has to be ratified by the Senate by a supermajority, 2/3 majority. Right here? The Senate has to ratify treaties. John Tyler's no fool. He knows that are there enough northern senators who will block a slave state if it needs 2/3. So instead he says, well, let's just do it by a law, a joint resolution. That's what we call it. A joint. In other words, rather than have a treaty, both houses will just vote on the issue. So it won't be a treaty. It'll just be a resolution to annex Texas. And there are enough votes in both houses to pass that. So we don't have a treaty to add Texas to the United States. We don't have a treaty with Texas. We just annexed them with a joint resolution, both houses of Congress. So what that means is, it's like today, if you only have just enough to pass a bill in both houses, then that's all you can do, but let's make it the rule. So no treaty, Senate treaty rather. The Senate has to ratify treaties. It's in the Constitution. The way around it is don't have a treaty. Okay? Senate can declare war, right? Yeah, I mean, that's the only way the war is declared, is by the Congress. So you just don't declare it, right? So you got to get what I'm saying. And Tyler seizes this moment to try to get some sort of success. Yay, we got Texas. Now, how was the election a factor? What had Polk campaigned on annexing Texas? So Tyler saw that as like we would call this today in politics a mandate, meaning Polk openly campaigned in favor of it, got elected, therefore it's what the American people want. Thus, I will push for it. Okay? A mandate. And Tyler, wanting to have some success for himself, pushed forward on this. Cool. Now, this is part of a much larger narrative that I want to look at. Okay? So, the idea of taking Texas, the idea of going to Oregon, all of this is part of a much bigger phrase, a much bigger term, which is the title of my PowerPoint. What does all of this add up to being called? Manifest destiny. So really want to underline that term. Pick that term out of your notes here. Huh?
You're going to show the picture.
Which picture?
The picture every.
That picture?
Yeah.
Right? The picture? You talking about American Progress?
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't name, right? How about that picture?
I don't know.
I mean, that's an even, well, that was just my guy Lurtz up there, but I'll tell you about this. So this is a period where Americans were very, very excited about the majesty and grandeur and bigness of our country. Keep in mind, the only other countries comparable to the United States in size, y'all, China, Russia, and Canada, right? Well, Canada's a wilderness. China was as, bizarre. I mean, nobody knew much about China. And Russia had a vast empty plain in the middle of it, right? So we had, by all accounts, the coolest country on earth, in terms of just natural splendor. This is the stuff the Transcendentalists were writing about. This is the stuff that the Hudson River School and the Luminists were painting. And who were every day loading up before they died of dysentery? Pioneers, right, on the Oregon Trail. So this is when the Oregon Trail starts heating up. Before it was go west of the Appalachians, right? Then it was west of the Mississippi. But now it's west of the Rockies. Starting to see, like, we are really moving westward as a people. And you have a lot of people talking about it. So keep in mind, people were migrating to this corner of the Louisiana Purchase. People had been migrating into Texas. People were now migrating into Mexican territory called California. Right? California. So all these trails, the Mormons had already come out to what would one day be Utah. Remember that? So everybody was headed westward. See, not literally everybody. This is, by the way, the same time as the Industrial Revolution. So the beauty of America's immigration history, and I think it's one of the reasons why you have a lot more intense nativism now. Throughout most of history, there's always been immigration followed by nativism, right? But what could happen is if you felt overcrowded in Boston or Philadelphia, what could you do? And if you felt overcrowded in Cleveland or Cincinnati or Louisville, you could move, right? Like, so there was always this westward growth. That's part of our history. That's the fact. One historian calls it the narrative. That is the very definition of American history. The frontier. You understand? And so the debate then began to heat up about Oregon. So if you go back to John Quincy Adams when he was the Secretary of State for James Monroe, we had worked out a treaty with Britain over Oregon. It's called the Oregon Treaty of 1818, or the Convention of 1818. But the problem is, it had not defined what was American, what was British. It had said, we will jointly share this territory. Now remember, Quincy Adams had done this with Monroe because they were concerned about the Russians coming down, right? Alaska. But you had this area where initially the only real people here, besides the Native Americans, were like fur trappers and stuff. But now, who's starting to move here? That's it, the pioneers, right? The settlers are starting. In other words, it wasn't a big deal. Who cares when people are killing beaver and that's it out there, right? Or grizzly bears. But now you have homesteaders, you have settlers coming to what would now be like Seattle and Portland. See Portland right here? Here's Seattle. So they're settling in here. And the green area is the problem. But it really wasn't that big a problem, except for right here. Because there really weren't any Americans up here. But there are Americans here and British people here, or Canadians here, in this little corner. So it's between the Columbia River, okay? This is the 49th parallel. All right, and what? Yeah, so in here's the Columbia River, you follow it? So in this little quadrangle created here by the Pacific Ocean, the Columbia River, and the 49th parallel, it was a dispute. At this point, Britain began to realize something. We probably killed enough beaver here. They're not all dead. Do we really want to fight over Oregon wilderness? Because there were Americans who ran and voted for James K. Polk who said 54-40 or fight. Do you know where 54-40 is up there? Fort Simpson. So they're saying, here's 49. They're saying 54-40. The expansionists, the Manifest Destiny types, not an inch given to Britain. 54-40 or what? Or fight. So Oregon fever had drawn some good. By the way, they didn't even have to pay for the land. You live there and they could claim it, right? Yeah, Alice was there. So the Brits are starting to say, maybe we've got problems in Africa we got to deal with, all right? We've got problems in South Asia. Southwestern Canada is not really our major concern. And so, particularly with this Creole incident and this Caroline incident, you guys remember those two? So what they do is this is during President Polk's presidency, so I don't want to get the cart before the horse. I'm telling you, this is the problem. Polk's not fixed. So, Manifest Destiny, what is it? Guys, I really want you to put a star beside this because this is one of those SOL, AP, always broad theme, major topics. Sexualism, major antebellum topic, right? You talk about we're not going to get to the Civil War things. Well, don't forget this period of expansion because it's the expansion period that's going to lead to the Civil War. It's not just slavery. It's the reason why the Civil War happens, folks, is not because of the existence of slavery. It's because of the debate over the spread of slavery. And you don't have the debate over the spread of slavery if we're not what? We're not expanding. Okay? We're not taking over territory. So, obviously, throughout this period, cheap land is going to be routinely available. And in the Pacific Northwest, it's free. You can't get free land in Seattle anymore. Okay? Well, maybe in Portland, right, downtown. Nobody owns that one section. There's that free zone or whatever they call it. People went broke back east. And so whenever they went broke, they'd go west and try to start again. Go west over again. But we need to define right now in our brain what Manifest Destiny means. And I probably should capitalize that. That's one of those things that should pretty much always be capitalized. Proper noun. So the phrase itself was actually coined by an American newspaper publisher named John O'Sullivan. Okay? And what John O'Sullivan meant was it was God who had ordained the American people this territory. So let that settle in for your brain. Keep in mind, this is not unoccupied land, right? The easiest way to think of manifest destiny is to just look at the map and imagine it without this on. Look at a map of the United States. I don't have one here somewhere. Somewhere. Maybe I don't. Okay, further back. Think about America, though, without this in it. It looks weird to us, doesn't it? It looked weird to them, too. They said, this should be ours. So we get Texas. We're negotiating Oregon. What's clearly missing?
California.
California. That's the big one, right? Keep in mind, 1 in 8 Americans today is a Californian. Understand? Yeah, I know. Like, you could argue there are 5 states in America that are America. But California is definitely one of them. All right?
Belong to Mexico.
Huh?
Belong to Mexico.
It did belong to Mexico, yeah. Yeah, all that belonged to Mexico. But that didn't really affect us much. Keep in mind, Mexico only been a country since 1821. So in our minds, they barely could have access to it, right? So yeah, absolutely. This is the United States of Mexico's territory. That's what they call it. Okay? But they visualize, they being these manifest destiny people, the easiest way to think of it is from sea to shining sea. You know, like you heard that phrase, from sea to shining sea. Well, they looked at this map, and that's what that we see today. I'm pointing at this big country map. And that's what they envisioned America being, regardless of who controlled it. You know, and if you think about how we got Louisiana, how we got Florida, was that a realistic possibility? And Polk, candidate Polk, Congressman Polk, Speaker of the House Polk, he campaigned on getting it. He campaigned on this, this, and this. He said, we will get California. Now, he said, we'll buy it from Mexico. It kind of reminds me of President Trump. President Trump said, who would build a wall? Mexico would. They'll pay for it. Well, they're not going to do that. Now, we could have invaded Mexico, took their money, and made them build a wall, right? You didn't suggest that, right? You put a tax maybe on products exported from Mexico. I don't know. But Polk says we're going to get California. We're going to get Oregon. We're going to get Texas. And why are we going to get it? Well, look at what he says, what O'Sullivan says. It is our what word?
Right.
It is our right to overspread and possess the whole of the continent which God, Providence, capital P, God, has given us for the development of the great experiment of what? Liberty and our federal system of government. It is the right such that of a tree to the space of air and earth, suitable for the expansion of its principle and destiny of growth. It is God ordained that we spread liberty like a blanket over this part of the Western Hemisphere, right? Now you could argue the Sioux people were a little bit, questionable about this, right? But nonetheless, this actually is a very strong attitude that emerges in America, particularly amongst voters for the Democratic Party. Now, keep in mind, Jefferson had described America as an empire of liberty. So we don't call ourselves imperialists when we take over. We're spreading liberty, right? It's not really an empire. We're bringing freedom where we go. So this is what manifest destiny means. God has ordained our destiny, our future. Manifest means to make obvious, right? It's obvious. This map was obvious, right? That's what they're arguing. And so this will be a driving attitude in the 1840s. When you think of decades, 1840s to the 1830s, Jacksonian democracy. Okay, 1820s, arrogant feeling. 1810s, War of 1812. Right? You see how easy you can kind of wrap it up in one major thing? Well, the 40s, overwhelmingly manifest destiny. And that will be embodied in one candidate. But before that, I like to show the art. And yes, this is the art that appears on almost every AP exam question dealing with this subject. So it is an actual painting we have to examine a little bit closer. Now, what's interesting about it, it was painted after the fact. but not really, because we were still going westward in the 1870s. Only that time we were going what? By the 1870s would have been doing. All right, trains. So this is more of a pioneering, like with, the prairie wagon, the Conestoga wagon. But if you look here, what do you think this thing here is? And you need to learn to identify her. Anybody know her name? Okay. This, folks, is Columbia. That's her name. With the U. C-O-L-U. Columbia. Not the country. Columbia is the personification of America. So, like, when we get the Statue of Liberty, that's her. The French send us female liberty. Right? What has not sort of moved into the national conscience or zeitgeist as representative of America yet? Today, if I were to represent America as a single, like, being, who would I be?
Sam.
Uncle Sam. Exactly. Uncle Sam, right? Like, that's 20th century. We recognize Uncle Sam. The 19th century person would know who Uncle Sam is, but they knew who Columbia was. Okay? She's leading them. What direction is the painting facing?
West.
Yeah, to the west, right? What do you see off in the distance?
Oh, log.
Mm-hmm. Snow-covered mountain peaks. So I know it's hard to tell from where you sit, but that's the Rocky Mountains, right? We go to the Rocky Mountains. Are there lots and lots of people back there? Can you see those? Right? Lots and lots of frontiersmen. What's this? You see it? You see it now?
Looks like a wall.
I'm looking at the lower left corner of the painting. That's a Native American running away from who? Columbia. All right. So yeah, this is progress, and you better get out of the way. All right, progress. American progress. So if you see this painting, very, very reflective of what idea or concept. Very good. Manifest destiny. There is another painting similar in nature, and it is westward the course of what word? Interesting. Empire. Now, the painter is Emmanuel Lurtz. Does anybody recognize that name? German immigrant. 48ers. Remember those? But not only that, he painted that painting right there, y'all. Washington crossing the Delaware. You guys remember how huge that painting was? Same time period. What was America on the verge of doing in 1860? Tearing itself apart, right? So this is a painting showing America going west. And look at it. What's the direction is this usually when you look at it? That's the west. That's the horizon. Like in the horizon is, if you look carefully, you'll see these are scores of like wagons coming up through the mountains, right? See the peaks in the background? And then they're like skulls down here and stuff. But then you look off there, and here are the valleys, and that's like San Francisco Harbor, and luscious, like this is, once you make it over the mountains, you've reached nirvana, so to speak. You've reached the happy place of California. And again, by 1860, California was America. All right? But in 1844, it wasn't. So that's a big change, right? 16 years. So everybody recognize these two paintings and understand that people were completely comfortable. If we could get the Danes to sell us Greenland, nobody would, I think, be that upset about that, right? But if we invaded Denmark to take Greenland, I think there'd be a lot of Americans upset about it. You understand? Like even now, as callous as Americans have shown to be in this entire pandemic, I don't think we're comfortable with the idea of invading countries to take their territory. We weren't that comfortable with it then. I've got a lot of writing about it. But we did think that it was ours owed to us. Make sense? So in other words, God had given it to us. Who needed to get out of the way? Who needed to get out of the way?
The natives.
Native Americans, Mexicans, anybody else in the way? The Brits. So that's how we viewed that. Okay? So make sure you know that. And as you can see, 4 million people are going to migrate out of here, which is a lot of people, And keep in mind, this is a month, plural, expedition. Very, very difficult. People died. You guys heard of the Donner Party? So there's a place in Utah that's so steep and difficult to traverse. It's called the Donner Pass, named after the group. The Donner Party were a group of Oregon trailsmen, like family, who got lost trying to get through the Rockies, and they ate each other in a blizzard. Very famous cannibalist story in American history called the Donner Party. So, this was not an easy thing to do. It's a reason why I used to play Oregon Trail with my elementary school kids when I first was teaching. And, you could die from all kinds of things. It was like constant, potential death. Obviously, the most famous is you have died of dysentery, which is famous. But you could break an axle, a wagon wheel, and that was it. You started it, or you got killed by Native Americans who were hostile. So that brings us to the election of 1844. So I want to conclude today with the election of 1844, but he gets his own PowerPoint because it's that freaking cool. All right. So my guy is James K. Polk. Now, when I say my guy, I like Polk not because of some of the things he does, but what he says he's going to do. And then tomorrow we will fight the Mexican War. So let's get into this election of 1844. Okay. Such a fun election. Jimmy Polk is one of the rare presidents in history who actually does what he says he's going to do. That's why I like it. It's so rare to have a president actually deliver on what they campaign on. And boy, does he deliver. So first of all, you're going to learn when you're doing the reading and stuff like that, that, it's kind of wicked to look at it. Freak you out. That James K. Polk was called a dark horse. You need to know what a dark horse is, first of all. That's a term you may or may not have heard of. A dark horse is an unexpected candidate. A candidate that nobody thought would be the candidate. I'm not going to say Donald Trump was a dark horse. Actually, he was a dark horse in 2016. Nobody seriously thought Donald Trump was going to be the Republican Party nominee in 2016. Except for Donald Trump, apparently. But very quickly, he emerged from not only being, kind of what we thought was a novelty candidate to the leading candidate. Well, James K. Polk shouldn't have been a dark horse. He's running as the Democratic candidate. He had been the governor of Tennessee more than once. Okay? He was called Young Hickory because he was Andrew Jackson's lieutenant, chief lieutenant in Congress. And he was the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So that's not an unknown person, but Americans didn't really know who he was. He wasn't a what, in other words? Who are the winning candidates of late? Well, that was one election. What was Harrison? What was Jackson? What was Washington? Well, yes, not Harrison, but they were generals. So in other words, the idea of the time, by the way, they're going to run a general here in this election, this campaign. So he's running against a variety of candidates. The theory had emerged that you had to already be famous. This is what people like me failed to understand in the election of 2016, is that Donald Trump was so famous, it didn't matter that he had never held any elected or military office at all. He had zero experience in any of the things traditionally politicians have. But he was super popular, right, or famous. So Polk wasn't. He wasn't famous. So he was called a what? A dark horse. Okay? And he had a mullet, which is also cool. Right? He rocked the mullet. Pretty hardcore. Now, the Whigs finally got around to running the guy they were supposed to again. Who's the obvious Whig? He's like the king of the Whigs. He's like, well, not king, he represented that, but he's the leader of the Whigs, right? He's the obvious Whig. Him or Daniel Webster. By the way, I will mention the Liberty Party is going to run in this election too. He runs with a New Jersey guy named Freelandheim. Here's the plague. And here's the Liberty Party. Now, it's this election that's going to have some insight into what happens sometimes with third-party candidates. Have you ever heard the term spoiler? You've certainly heard the word with movies, so spoiler. I don't mean it like that. A spoiler in election is often thought to be a candidate who ends up costing another candidate the victory. You understand now what I mean by that?
Yeah, yeah.
So a third party, in other words, in some elections, it's not clear that the third parties had any impact at all. This is not one of those elections. This is an election where it is very clear this guy has an influence. And that's why people got to pay attention to the Liberty Party. Okay? So Clay, Bernie, and Polk. Now, the most controversial issue of the time is Texas. You might, I've told you Texas comes in, but now I'm telling you, this is what their campaign. And Clay is going to get in trouble here. Because in some parts of the country, he says he advocates Texas statehood. But in other parts, he says he doesn't. So he's caught trying to be on both sides. Today, we would call this being on both sides of the fence, right? Well, down there, he's trying to be on both sides of the river. You see how he's like somewhere in between? All right, so they're going to consider him a flip-flopper on this. So the Whigs are really much opposed to Texas statehood. But Clay kind of hedges on that. You might Clay's a slaveholder. Clay's from Kentucky, right? Polk's a slaveholder. He's from Tennessee. So, here's Polk, though. What's he say to Texas?
Welcome, Texas.
Welcome, Texas. Welcome, brothers. So, unabashedly supportive of Texas statehood. Kind of hedging a little bit Henry Clay. He's trying to escape any decisions. Clay, of course, is famous as the Great Who. What's his nickname? Great Compromiser. So he's trying to find the middle ground between, of course, the problem between statehood and not statehood is that there's not really much middle ground, is it? Right? So here is a Whig cartoon. I probably shouldn't have told you it's a Whig cartoon, but this is a critical of James K. Polk cartoon. And it says, here's Texas, the beast. I fear I cannot carry you into the presidential chair. Dear Texas, I knew you cannot. I wish I had rode some other horse, but it is too late to repent. I love this monster, though. It's like something out of where the wild pigs are. But anyway.
Well, it might be because just the picture itself, but why does it look like he's morphing into the...
He's writing it, but this is written by drawn by a not very skilled artist. So he's like straddling his neck writing it. But he's got like stick legs, and he kind of looks like a elf on the shelf there a little bit, like Hulk on the yoke. So anyway, yeah, can't get there, right? So, bam, this is how close the election is. Now, I know you're like, that's not that big a deal, right? I mean, that looks like a pretty big win right there. But if you look at the popular vote, you see this? How many votes does Bernie get, y'all?
3%.
Yeah, but 62,000. Almost all of those, guess what state? New York. Back then, New York was the swing state. Now, New York. Who won New York? Polk. Had the theory goes this way: had Bernie's voters voted in the election still between Polk and Clay, who would they have chosen? Clay, because Clay was more reluctant. Clay was not supportive of Manifest Destiny overtly. He didn't talk about it. So this is why we say that sometimes in this election, Liberty Party was a spoiler party, meaning over 7,000 of these votes were in New York, a city. Had these votes gone in New York from Bernie to Clay, now there's no guarantee they would have, but had they, Clay would have won New York. Had he won those 36 electoral votes, what do you have? What's 36 from 170? 134, right? 36 of that, 141. Who's president? What? Yeah, New York is the swing state. And so, nonetheless, Polk wins. And he wins pretty well, in the South, but he loses his home state. Right? Clay wins his home state. He loses Carolina. So this is not, first of all, I want you to take away a couple things from this. One, Liberty Party has a major influence, surprisingly. And this is why third-party votes matter, I think. I think they do matter because they send a message. Like, you guys weren't taking on this issue, so I voted for somebody else, and now you're not in office. Right now, you've got Republicans in Georgia telling Georgians to not vote for Republican senators because they did not deliver the state to Trump. That's what they're saying, So it's interesting. It's an interesting time we're in. But they were in it too. So the point is that that's important. Also, the Whigs clearly are not just a what party? Right. They're not just a Northeast sectional party. Good. They're a national party. As is who else? And so as late as the 1840s, America's two major parties were not sectional yet. And that the argument goes, as long as our parties represented a variety of Americans, across multiple areas, we're in good shape. When the parties become purely sectionalized, not so good shape, right? So this is important. So let's get into who Polk was. Okay, and to do this, here's old Jimmy. Y'all listen at home now. I can't teach you James K. Polk any better than 1990s alt rock band, They Might Be Giants. Oh no, I jammed it up. Sorry. My computer froze with the They Might Be Giants. Let me try that from here again, because it's such a great song. Here we go. This is somebody's AP project. So Napoleon of the Stump, meaning a great campaigner, a stump speaker. Damn right. All right. Now you get ready for the Rock Zither.
What? I don't know if I'm prepared.
Rock Zither, y'all. Like a nerd band from the 90s. They Might Be Giants. I kid you not. A stump speaker, cut down a tree and stand on a stump. Napoleon of the Stump. Now you think about this is what he campaigns on. He's going to deliver. Oh, and austere means stern, severe, stiff, like. That's like the best AP chapter ever. In one solid. All right, you're welcome. Yeah, man. They might be not. You can see him perform this live on YouTube and occasionally at bars in Massachusetts. But yeah, so what you see here is James K. Polk had a very, very defined platform. You understand what that means? An agenda. I'm going to do 5 things, he said. 5 things, and then I'm not going to run for a second term. They were like, really? Okay, let's see. So what were the 5 things? First we're straight out of the Democratic playbook. Not surprising, but campaign worthy. Lower the tariff. I'm going to make the tariff go down because those Whigs, they keep raising the tariff, and that makes prices expensive. By the way, Polk is the first president we had who actually philosophically embraced the idea of free trade. Meaning understood that lower tariffs don't just mean it's better to buy stuff for Southerners. It means you can actually get better relationship with other countries and trade with them. The same time they lower the tariff here in America, the British are going to abolish tariff on imported grains. They're going to do away with the corn law tariffs. So this is the beginning. If you ever wondered when like free trade starts, this is it. When the British and Americans start to say philosophically, tariffs aren't really the best idea. Protectionism isn't working. So he's going to lower the tariff, he says, which he does, the Walker tariff. He's going to solve the problem with Britain and Oregon. Now, his candidacy, his supporters, his surrogates have been saying 54, 40, or fight. So please remember that. He campaigns on Oregon, but keep in mind, for Polk, the Tennessean, Oregon isn't really, he just wants it fixed. He doesn't necessarily care as much about all of Oregon as he does about resolving Oregon. So those two. The third thing, he is going to bring back that independent treasury that Van Buren made that was killed so quickly that it never got off the ground. In other words, is there going to be buses under Polk, Bank of the United States? No. No, the independent treasury is the opposite of this. This is fiscally sound because it means money will only be based on banks, not on who. He says it's sound. When you borrow money, you won't be borrowing whose money? The government's money. That's not an option. Independent treasury. And he's going to get that. He's going to acquire California, he says. Well, that one's going to be the hardest one of the five. By far. Two of which pretty easy. He has a Democratic Congress. He's going to get the tariff, and he's going to get the independent treasury, no problem. Oregon, he's going to have to negotiate a little bit, but by 1846 he gets. The problem is Mexico does not want to sell him California. Now, I told you there were five. What was the fifth? Okay. I'm going to give it to you. The fifth was to annex Texas. Why does that not matter? Because once he gets elected, John Tyler finishes the job. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's actually resolved before he even comes in. To be like Joe Biden, be like, I'm going to have a vaccine for the pandemic when I become president. And then becomes president of the pandemic. Oh, look how convenient that is. You know, like, that already happened. Like, campaign on it. Oh, and then he makes a sixth promise, and that is that he will not serve a second term. And he honors that promise, and he dies like 2 years later. He wasn't in great health even when he ran for president. And being president pretty much killed him. He died of dysentery. You know, he crapped himself to death. But tough way to go, right? Well, you really die of like dehydration and just, well, you can't produce anymore. But he had all kinds of like stomach and intestinal problems that he had dealt with. But he was a workaholic, they said. Like he worked around the hours, you know, like a lot of late night hours, burning midnight oil kind of thing. But the reason why I like him is that not only did he campaign on specific things, not like silly ideas alone. You know, I love it when candidates campaign on things like hope. Yeah, I like hope, change, right? But also make America great. Okay, yeah, these sound good, but what are you actually going to do? You know, Paul's not about that. He's like, this is what we're going to do. This is the specific thing. And like I said, 4 of the 5 happened under his watch. Really, I mean, he has some political difficulty, but the Mexican War is going to be the toughie. All right, and so that's going to be the issue that we're going to take on tomorrow. And I will stop with recorded notes now. So if you're playing at home, hopefully that's been pretty illuminating.